Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, my guest is Chris Mcdonald, who is actually the host of the Mcfiles Network. I think a few of you may have seen him before. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good to see you, young lady. It's always a pleasure. You know, I consider you my own, and you're just sweet. And I'm saying this not in a joking way. I mean, I'm being very serious. You are we've just been honored to have you on the Mcfiles every week and host your show. And I got to meet you in person last year, and that was an honor. And I'm glad to be here. It's an honor to be here with you. It really is.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I actually first got on the Mcfiles because one of your viewers had sent me messages for like 3 months saying, just go on Chris's show, and didn't tell me who Chris was. As it I didn't know what it was, and he just kept sending no links, nothing. Just go on
Yeah.
Chris's show. Eventually, I had to pretty much yell at him on DM, be like, "What does that mean?"
Yeah,
He's accusing me of ignoring him.
it's funny.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to have you on because we have not on this show really talked about the impact over the last 6 months or so, post-Trump being in office, on conservative media. So just to start off, how has it been in the conservative media world since the inauguration?
It's been rough. It's been very rough, Magdalene. I was just sharing this. We're doing this show on the 11th, recording it, and I was on the show last night on mine late, and there's been a lot of people who got really discouraged right after the election. They did. A lot of conservatives got discouraged. And look, I'm not going to say anything to get your channel whacked, but we know that this election, there was a lot of questions over it. I'll just say it like this. There's a lot of questions over the legitimacy of the campaign, what happened with the votes. And I think a lot of people felt sort of disenfranchised. There was millions. We had 74 million people vote for President Trump. 74 million, biggest number ever that a sitting president got as far as a popular vote. Now, we don't elect presidents by popular vote, we elect them by electoral. But the 6 states that are in question, there are still questions raging over the legitimacy of those counts. And I think a lot of people was expecting Trump to win in a landslide, which I was one of them. Trust me, I did not see Joe Biden ever remotely being close to this man. And it never made sense to me until now why the Democrats would put such a loser up as their candidate. And also Kamala. If you think about it, Kamala was the least popular. When they first started out in the primary, they did some polling, and Kamala Harris was the least popular of all of those people. I'm talking about Andrew Yang. Even Pete Buttigieg was polling better than Kamala Harris. Beto was polling better than Kamala Harris. And she was the most despised person among Democrats. And there was a lot of people that the black community hated her because of what she did as an attorney general in California with the incarceration situation of blacks. And it never made any sense why they would put these two people as the face of their party until now. I don't think it mattered who was there. They had this plan in place. But you ask about the effect of media, and this ties into this. All of this hit people in the gut.
Yeah.
It hit them in the gut. We've taken a hit. Our audience has changed. It has. I've tried to keep a very level approach to these things, to report what I know to be fact, not what is out there, because you know as well as I do, because we traffic in the same information arena. There's a lot of stuff out there that ain't true. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that people wish it was true, but it's not. And wishing it was true and being factually truth is two different things. And I'm afraid that a lot of this misinformation, Magdalene, has gotten into people's bloodstream. Yeah, and they live in this world that they believe that it's going to happen. And it may, look, me and you may sit here, we may have a show one night, I may call you on and say, kid, all this was true, all this was real, and I'm just trying to keep people grounded. It's hard to do that right now because people want this fixed right away, and it's not going to get fixed right away, Magdalene.
It definitely is. And that sort of disenfranchisement is something nobody talks about from the GOP. Nobody's mentioning it. They're not even mentioning it, how it comes down to voting in local elections. So in conservative alternative media, have you seen the audience become withdrawn? Have you seen sadness? What is the sort of prolonged emotional effect? Because I've seen pretty much every emotion you can.
I think you described all of them, but I think what they are right now, they're disillusioned because they were told one thing by many people
Mhm.
that this election fraud was being addressed, and it was not. Look, they knew this information, Magdalene. I believe personally, this is an opinion, and I'm going to make sure people understand this. I don't have no factual basis for what I'm about to say, but this is Chris's opinion about it. I do believe they knew this was up as early as 2018. There were a lot of elections in 2018, I believe, that were probably done this same way, but it didn't get the media attention because the GOP was so busy fighting Trump at the time. And if you remember in 2018, what were we focused on? The Mueller report, Russia collusion, impeaching Trump. The media had done the masterful job of smokescreening the real story. And then we had this midterm election where the House went back to the Dems and the Senate almost went back.
Mhm.
And nobody looked at the electoral process. They didn't see anything going on because our attention was, we were chasing all these things over here. And I really believe that this was going on 2 years ago. My issue with the Trump administration is this, and it is good as much was confirmed in his interview with Sean Hannity about a month ago. They were not paying attention, Magdalene. I've heard it on your show often. They were not paying attention to things they should have been paying attention to. And, your state of Virginia is a great example. Virginia was winnable if they would have got boots on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Other states that were sort of purple is what I call them, were winnable if they would have got out there and not taken it for granted. You had a dementia patient as you're running against. Look, in politics, you can't take anything for granted.
Right.
And I'm getting back to my point about people. All of this gets people disillusioned because they get one thing in their mind that's going to happen. And when it don't happen, then they say, well, what are we going to do? And I think that's what I'm seeing. They don't know where this is going to wind up being settled. And this host right now don't know that answer. I wished I did. I do know it's a long-term thing, but I don't blame all of it on the Dems, Magdalene. I blame some of it on the Republicans, a lot of it. And I have to lay some of the blame at Trump's door because he didn't do a lot of things. He told Sean Hannity that. He said, look, because Hannity confronted him about the indictments. He confronted him about the criminal stuff that was going on. And he said, why didn't the Justice Department arrest this person or indict this person or indict that person? And President Trump just looked in the camera and said, well, I took for granted they were doing their jobs. And he said, I should have been more on top of it. And let me tell you something. He's absolutely right. You know why? Because the Department of Justice is not a judicial branch. It's part of the executive branch. He's over the Department of Justice. That was his call.
Yeah.
And if your attorney general's not doing his job, you get him out. And you've got every right to fire him. He didn't do that.
And that's something that other politicians know. They have fired their attorney generals. They've put in people who are completely, even when they shouldn't, people who are completely loyal to them, people who either were their family members or might as well have been. And that sort of brings me to another thing I've seen in the fallout of all of this is a lot of people feel, I think, that Trump dropped the ball on paying attention to what was going on and a lot of the legal changes that were happening on different states, especially in areas like Nevada and a lot of areas that we now know are under audit. Do you think that there is viewer anger at Trump? Are there people who are upset about it? Or is it just sort of this resigned feeling of the campaign just sort of sabotaged him?
I think the latter more, but there is some, I wouldn't call it anger, but I think disappointment. I think there's a lot of people disappointed. I was in D.C. Back in December and January. I was there for the Steal the Vote campaign, and that's the weekend I saw you going up to D.C. or January. I know one of those weekends when I was going up, but January was the kicker because January was the day that the vote got certified, and that's the day that all hell broke loose in D.C. with the Capitol. I was there, and I was watching the crowd that day, and when I got the sinking feeling that this was done, that we were going to have Joe Biden as our president, was that morning when I heard Trump Jr., Donald Trump himself, Rudy Giuliani. They had a lot of these speakers up there, and people were standing, Magdalene, in bitter cold. I'm telling you, it was so cold that morning. It was rainy. It was bitter cold. And Rudy Giuliani was when I heard Rudy Giuliani speak, it hit me. We were sunk. He got up there, and I had just watched him on television 2 nights before. Mm-hmm. He had got up there on that podium and was literally reading the exact same talking points, the exact same script, and the narrative that he had just given an interview with 2 nights before. And even people in that pro-Trump audience, this was not an anti-Trump audience, this was Trump supporters. We were there to support the president. We wanted him to fight this certification. And this was hours before Pence gave in and did his thing. And I don't want to get into that. But there were people that started screaming from the audience. They said, we already know that. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And nothing but silence from that podium. And Don Jr. did the same thing. All he did was regurgitate talking points. President Trump, very solemn, no fight. It's like, we need to go peacefully, let our voices be heard, but there was no plan. And it wasn't anger that I felt in that audience. It was this letdown. It was this balloon. It's like popping a balloon. And we're all there thinking, wow, we're here and they're going to do a lot of stuff and they're going to get this fixed. There was none of that. And to be honest with you, I felt that before. I felt it in December when I sat down with a former CIA agent in front of my table in DC, and I sat down with him on December the 11th. I know the night because it was the day before the big march in DC to stop the steal. And he looked at me in the face and he said, I don't mean to be a killjoy. He said, I don't want to bust your bubble. He said, I just came out of a meeting of what happened with the election. And he said, they've not fixed it. He said, they're not going to do nothing about it. And he told me a lot of other things I can't get into on your show that if the public knew, they would be very, very disappointed, and probably they would get angry if they knew some of the stuff that went on behind the scenes. And Magdalene, that's the horrible part of Washington, D.C. It is a swamp. It is such a cesspool. There are so many backroom deals. There are so many backstabbing things going on with people. We don't know who to trust up there anymore. I'm telling you, there are no individuals, period, that we feel like we can trust. And I think that is what disappoints people. Are they angry about it? Maybe a little bit, but they're more just, again, it goes back to the disillusionment and letdown that nobody fought, because this should have been fought. I know these audits are important, but Magdalene, we should have been doing this back in November. They knew this stuff something was wrong in Denmark. And that's what I feel in my audience is that, okay, it's great that you're doing it now, but even now we're being put off. Every time that they give us a date that something's going to be said, they say, well, we got to do this now. So we're going to move this date from July. It was supposed to be July. Now it was August 1st. Now I'm here in September 1st in Arizona even. And the other states are starting their audits, which could take years. And guess what? We got another election coming up in a year. We got another midterm coming up just a year from October or November. And then we got the presidential election in 2 years. And again, that's why I'm telling people they do not need to believe in any remote figment of their imagination that this is going to get solved quickly. And I hear that too. And that concerns me because that's, again, leading up and setting people up for disillusionment and disappointment. And that's what I feel for people for.
It is. And I've seen that, this sort of desperatism to have it be like it was, to figure out that it's all been a bad dream. And you mentioned that there was no plan. And that's something that I've heard from so many guests I've had on the show about multiple topics throughout political sphere since this inauguration, is that there was no plan for if you lost. There was no plan for voter outreach. There was no plan for how to get out the vote operation in states that were not traditionally red. This idea that you were just sort of going to show up and everything was going to be fine on election day. And this lack of plan, I mean, it has now transferred. I've been in conservative alternative media through now a midterm cycle and this and a couple local election cycles. There's never a plan from the GOP on what's going to happen. So in conservative media, how have you seen that lack of plan manifest, or have you seen it manifest?
That has been their issue from day one. Look, it's not just been this, but I think what makes me so angry with the GOP is that there is an element in the GOP that hated Trump so bad they were willing to let the country literally go to hell over it. There was all these GOP people that are out there screaming the loudest right now about the border. They were totally silent during the Trump years. When Trump was closing the border, he was getting the border fixed. They were actually said nothing. They wouldn't go down there with him. He would go down to the border. You couldn't find these politicians anywhere. Now, all of a sudden, Ted Cruz has found Jesus, and he's down there every day doing a press conference at the border. We got to fix the border. We got to fix the border. Well, where were you when Trump was doing it? Where was all this action in Congress when Trump needed your help? Where was the GOP on Obamacare when they needed his help?
Yeah.
Where were they when we needed this monstrosity of a law to be? We had both houses, Senate and House,
I know.
and a Republican president, one vote, and three people. Lamar Alexander, who is nothing but a scumbag rhino from my state, was the first one to do it to him. McCain was the second one, which was, was just to be expected. But again, Magdalene, it shouldn't have been that close.
Right.
He had enough support in the Senate. It should not have come down to one man. And that's what it just infuriates me with the GOP, is that they sit around on their thumbs until something happens and it explodes. And then they see the political cost to them because they see people are angry and blaming them for it.
Yeah.
Well, we might need to rethink our position on Trump a little bit. Let's go out there and act like we're supporting him now. And I'm just one of these common sense kind of guys. And we're Southerners. We can smell bull pretty far away. We just can, because it's part of our landscape down here a lot. And when we listen to politicians do that kind of stuff, it turns us off and it turns our nose up. And I think it's not just Southerners. I think it's the entire country, because we are tired of these politicians doing the very thing you just described, sitting around, letting these things go on. And then all of a sudden, when it explodes, then they all of a sudden find Jesus and they're ready to fix everything. They should have been doing this with President Trump. They had a leader in place that was willing to work with them. And all they were doing was stabbing him in the back, left and right, left and right.
And we've seen that he had really no idea even who he had hired. He really did not even know who was running his campaign. He had no idea who was in charge of most of his publicity while in the West Wing, or most of his public affairs. And that brings me to a conversation I've had with several people. I've been very critical of DeSantis because I don't want to have another repeat where we're sitting there and we're like, well, he didn't really run a campaign. He didn't really know this was happening, because he has so many of those same people around him that Trump had. Do you think there's anybody who's building out like a real comprehensive team to look at the fallout of what happened on a media level, on a public relations level, to tackle the run in 24 on the Republican side?
I don't think anybody cares right now. That's what scares me the most. I don't think you've heard anything, and I sure haven't heard any movement out there. And I'm glad you mentioned the thing about President Trump's cabinet. The one thing we loved about President Trump ultimately became his downfall. He was an outsider.
Yeah.
He didn't know Washington, D.C. I think he thought he did.
Mm-hmm.
I remember an interview he did early on in his campaign, early on. Actually, it was right after he got elected president. And he was sincere. And he really, truly came to D.C. thinking, as a businessman, because this is that businessman mentality that he had, because he negotiates deals. That's what business people do, and especially him. He's a billionaire. He didn't get to become a billionaire without a few negotiations. And he felt like that even in D.C., his skills as a businessman, that he could bring the Democrats and the Republicans together for the good of the country. What he didn't realize was there was a core group of people, and you can call them the deep state, you can call them the swamp, you can call them establishment, you can call them lifelong politicians, whatever you want to call it. The names are immense, what you can call these people. That group was so deeply embedded, Magdalene, that it wouldn't have mattered what Trump did. And it wouldn't have mattered who it was in that office. If there was anybody that could have done it, it would have been him, simply because he was a fair broker going into this as an outsider. He didn't have a Republican. He was the Democrat for years before he ran for a Republican. And he wasn't Democrat because his ideology had changed. He was a businessman. He realized capitalism worked, and he didn't want the socialist left agenda that they were pushing. So he did have an opportunity to be a fair broker if the two parties would have been a fair broker. But what he didn't realize is that neither one were. Right. And it played over into his cabinet, because what he did, and I wouldn't call it naivety. I just think it was this hope that he had he could do it. I think that when he took advice from different people, and they would say, well, you need H.R. McMaster as your national security advisor, who's nothing but a Democrat swamp creature. And McMaster undermined him left and right. Mattis undermined him left and right. Chris Christie suggested Christopher Wray, which has become the most corrupt FBI director we've ever had, short of Bob Mueller. That was advice given to him by close friends. And Trump didn't know any better. And even Bill Barr. And see, the insanity of Bill Barr is, of all people that gave him the advice to do that, was George W. Bush Jr., who basically the president had accused of masterminding 9/11 in his campaign stops during 2015 and 2016. So none of this makes sense to the outsider looking in. And that part has always bugged me, is that he put the very people around him that he was trying to root out of D.C.
Yeah, he did.
And it was swamp.
He did over and over and over again. And I remember when his cabinet was first announced, or his whole group, and he announced Priebus as his
Yes.
sort of person in the
Same.
beginning. I thought to myself, that's not what anybody on the Republican side voted for. Nobody voted
No.
for Priebus to be chief of
No.
staff. That's a very bad sign. And then it sort of
snowballed.
continued down.
Can I interrupt and just say this?
Yes.
I do believe something happened to him after the midterms, though, because it seemed that he did change
Yeah.
and at least tried to
Yeah.
get some of that out, but it was too late by then, because
Yeah.
I think the roots had been dug in. And look, these people, Magdalene, I'd never seen, and I will say this, I love President Trump. I want to go on record and tell you, I love President Trump. I would vote for him 10 million times if he ran. I feel like the man was done so wrong by his own party. And the betrayals, to me, were the worst I've ever seen any president done. Look, I'm a little bit older than you. Not people can tell by looking at us, with this white hair of mine. But look, I remembered Ronald Reagan of the 1980s. And I thought the media treated Reagan pretty bad. And I was just out of high school. I was just your age now when Reagan was in office. And I thought, my God, I'd never seen a president treated as badly as Reagan. And I had never in my lifetime, dear, never seen the onslaught against a human being and his family. I'm not even talking about the presidential part. I'm talking about personal.
Yeah.
This was not political. This was personal vendetta, vicious character assassination attacks on him nonstop from the day he took office to the time of this atrocity that happened in 2020. And despite all of that, you look at the economy, you look at the accomplishments he did. It was a God-given mandate that it was a miracle that he did anything, was able to do anything with all of this going on around him. And I've never seen so many betrayals. Look, I don't know if you remember it early on when the Australian phone calls got leaked. You remember that? When his phone calls got leaked to the press?
Yeah.
Now, again, had that happened to another president, the media would have been up in arms, and they would have been screaming bloody murder for somebody's head. They were silent. And I knew right then that he was in for a tough road ahead. And that goes back to advice and counsel that was not being given to him that was accurate. Somebody but should have been fired immediately over that. Nobody was. And that's the kind of snowball you're talking about. And from there, it just went downhill. And betrayal after betrayal, you can only get stabbed in the back so many times till you fall over dead. I mean, you just can't sustain that many hits without being hit yourself. And I don't think I'm too far off on that.
No, I think that's true. And when someone is under the kind of attack he was, and I think even the media would admit that he was under a super level of attack, you have to have an iron group of people around you. It's got to be such a small circle that it's really impervious to flattery, and it's impervious to the grifting element. And that's something, I went to DC twice, I think once in 2019 and once in 2018. And I saw the grifting that I could not believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe the fact that there were young conservatives who I would speak to privately, and they're so smart and they're so intelligent, and they're so cutting edge in what they believe. And they get there and they just became these strange sycophants, and you could not speak to them about what was going on. So now in conservative media, do you see the grifting, the fact that people are still willing to just peddle whatever they can for their audience, or has there been some sort of audience accountability?
No accountability whatsoever. That's part of this disillusionment right now. And you're absolutely correct. That's a great point. Great question too, because there has been no accountability, because we're doing the same thing now. We're doing the very thing that got us in this mess on the right to begin with. And I'll word it like this. Magdalene, President Trump could not solve the problems of the country when he got elected in 2016. He was one man, okay?
Right.
Presidents never do. I don't care. You go back to George Washington all the way through Donald Trump. The president is never bigger than the office. The man is never bigger than the office. That office will be there. Trump, and even if Trump gets reelected in 2024, which I believe he's got a decent chance if we get the fraud out to do, he's still only there for 4 years. And if you look at America's history in terms of a 4 to 8 year blip every time a man is in office, our history is over 200 some odd years full. And the office has remained. And unfortunately, these grifters that you're talking about, they want to peddle their wares. I'm going to go out and say something. A lot of these YouTube channels that were around when Trump was around, they're no longer out there now. They're gone. They're absolutely gone. And that should tell people about their legitimacy.
Yeah,
that should tell people whether they were legitimate or not.
Yeah.
Because if they were only there for the Trump effect, that they could get in with the president and get the exposure, then they were there for the wrong reason, and a lot of them were. And you're absolutely correct. And I'm going to go a little bit further. I know this ain't a face show, but I'm going to just throw this little caveat in. That prayer group that he had around him, a lot of those ministers were in there for namesake only. That they could put it on they put it on a business card. I'm part of Trump's prayer group. But they never did anything to counsel him in a right manner. And it's like that was another thing that, and it still infuriates me when I think about it. People use it for their advantage, and they're still doing it because now it's looking like that he's getting ready to announce. We're not sure, but it's all indications are he may announce soon that he's 2024 is on the table. I've heard every crazy thing in the last 6 months. He's running for the Speaker of the House, this and that and the other. And I mean, the list could go on. And again, you look at these channels, some of them are new that have popped up, but they're going to be gone with the wind. The only channels that have stayed, present company included, is because we kept it real and we've kept it grounded. We don't try to give people false hope. We need to give people hope if it's real, based upon reality, based upon fact, and based upon something that we know to be true, not something we hope that is true. That's presumption. That's not faith. That if you presume something to be true, that's not really faith, because presuming can get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happened. And a lot of these channels did that. They presumed that Trump would be in office for 8 years. They didn't. They never gave it a thought that this could happen in January. What happened? None of them gave it a thought, and they banked their whole life on it. And again, when the disillusionment hit, people left, and they had to leave because their channels crumbled under the weight of it.
They did leave. And that's something people don't realize is how hard fought that 2016 campaign was. They don't get it. I was in high school, in my junior year. He announced at the very end of my sophomore year. And that campaign sucked up all the oxygen in the entire world. It was the only thing anyone talked about. It was basically through 2 solid years of the end of my high school life. And every day it was, what did he say? What does he believe? What is he saying about the nominees or the candidates? He was sort of omnipresent in his media coverage. And I knew when we were in 2020, this was not the same case. We were not in the same level of involvement at all, even just in the way the media almost seemed disinterested in what was going on. They had taken a different tactic. And that prayer group you mentioned, the same thing happened with the young conservative world. It's the exact same thing. They wanted the sort of name stamp that was going on. So going forward now, we're looking in at least to midterms. Personally, I don't think the GOP really cares about midterms. I'm not seeing a huge push for midterms right now.
I hadn't seen anything either.
Are we seeing leaders come on conservative media to sort of give their case? Are we seeing conservative movement leaders come on? Or is it just the same people saying the same things?
Same people saying the same thing. I hate to say it. There's a few new faces that are out there. Marjorie Taylor Greene being one. Laura Boebert is another one. The governor from North Dakota, South Dakota. I can't think of her name right now.
Christie.
But there are some new faces. But Magdalene, the GOP don't need new faces because, again, those new faces come and go. I'll just use somebody as an example. I'll look at Colonel Allen West. And I'm not even a big fan of Allen West, to be honest with you, but I'll just use him as an example. When he was running down in Florida, he was a big name in the GOP, big name. Yeah. And he's used that power. He's used that name to peddle power still after the fact. But he's gone. He's not in any place of leadership right now. And that's what happens with the GOP. They get caught up in these personalities.
They do.
And I'm going to say it. I hate to say it, but personalities don't save countries.
No.
We've become a personality cult society. We just have. It's true in the church. It's true in politics. It's everything. And I know your age group. I get it. They're very swayed by personality. You know, an old man like me who just, you know, gets on here and rants ain't going to be a much of appeal to a 19, 20-year-old. But if you get somebody like an AOC with her bowl of chocolate pudding and she's, you know, cooking her pudding on Instagram and then talking politics, you know, you're going to have some kid pull up a chair and say, hey, this girl sounds interesting. And then she's going to instill all this garbage in their mind, but all they're going to see is not the garbage. They're going to see the pudding that she's making. Yeah. Well, she's just like us. And see, that's where the GOP has failed. They underestimate that. They think that they can win this personality battle. They can't, because our personalities suck. We're dull. We're boring. All we do is look. I like Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I watch her page. All she does is bumper sticker politics. Yeah. It's like a slogan here, a slogan there, and we got to fight this and we got to fight that, and she becomes a hero because maybe she don't wear a mask when everybody else is wearing a mask. Yeah. And I'm not saying this to knock her down. Look, I love her. Right? She's from my state of Georgia, actually, and I think she's a great gal. But my point, she represents a bigger problem in the GOP. Yeah. We're hoping for these personalities to dig us out of this mess, Magdalene, and they're not going to. No. The people that are going to dig us out are the people watching us on this interview today. We, the people, have got to get out there and fight for our country locally. We got to start at the local level and get this swamp cleaned out, then work on the state, and then go to the feds. But I'm going to tell you something. The local level is where it starts. And if we're not going to get involved locally, I don't care what people say, but the swamp will never get to D.C. if you cut it off at its roots. And a lot of these politicians in D.C. got their start on a city council somewhere because nobody was paying attention in a local election and sit at home. And these swamp people gained power before you knew it. They were in D.C. running your country. Yeah. A little wisdom this morning from an old man. So,
well, it's very true. And, you know, I'll give an example of this. We're several months out from the inauguration. This country's in really big economic turmoil, especially now that Biden is passing that infrastructure bill. And I go to my phone and the text messages I get from the Trump campaign are, President Trump is disappointed you didn't meet him at his rally. He really wants to meet you. So he activated a 2-time entry, act now. And I'm like, and I look at this, and this is several times a day, and I keep on this thing because I want to know what he's sending out, what his campaign is sending out. And when I look at that, I think to myself, you have a direct line to, let's just say, 1 million people's phones. It's more than that, but let's say it is. And that's what you send out. And that's a microcosm of what's happening in the GOP now. And my question is, how do you get viewers or the politicians to understand that there's got to be new content? Because as a show host, I try to have on people who are going to say, you know, topics that we don't normally hear about from the GOP, maybe more about education or more about tech innovation. How do you change the conversation right now or push new policies? Because the politicians listen to what's on conservative media. They give no credit, but they do listen to what's talked about.
That's a good question. And I don't know if I have an answer for you because, you know, right now, it sort of goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. People are they're seeking answers right now. Mm-hmm. And I've watched your show because we host it every week, and you've had a great variety of guests. And yes, there's been some shows that have not been about politics. There's been, you've had some libertarians that, you know, I may not agree with the word they're saying, but they're intriguing people. And I do listen to their point of view. And I think that mix is needed right now. This may go against the grain. I almost believe people need a break from the political stuff for a while. Mm-hmm. And to get just refreshed about America again, to learn that there's a country outside of Washington, D.C., that these political whores, I hate to use that term, but that's what they are. Mm-hmm. They're nothing but political people that are selling out America for the cheapest buyer. Yeah. And they're selling us out for the cheapest buyer, Magdalene. It's not just the country, it's citizens. That's when I say America, I'm talking about me and you. I'm talking about the people. Mm-hmm. And we're being sold out for the highest bidder that they can find. And I think that people feel dirty. See, when you say politics, there's a difference in politics and government. I hear this all the time. I'm a faith person, and I hear people tell me, well, the church needs to get involved in politics. No, the church has no business in politics. Politics is the most dirtiest, demonic, system that we have ever had set up over this country. Our politics in this nation is as toxic and as dirty. I'm talking about filthy, gutter dirty than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. Getting involved in that is not what we need to do. What we do need to do is get involved in our government. And when you get involved in government, that's a noble pursuit. And that's where I'm talking about people need to refocus locally. They need to refocus on their communities. They need to refocus on their families. They need to refocus on what's good for them. And yes, when you have a tyrannical regime in place, it's hard to do that right now. Look, I had a neighbor, I got a good neighbor, and we were talking just a few days ago, and he went to the grocery store and he told me, he said, Chris, he said, I went to the grocery store and got, how did he put it? I got one bag of stuff, and he said, I paid as much for this one bag of stuff that I paid for 4 bags just a month ago. Yeah. And he was joking to me. It's real time stuff. See, we Americans are feeling that, Magdalene. That's real time people. That's real time individuals out there. And this la land that, again, a lot of these YouTubers live in, and they think that people are interested in all this la stuff. Look, people are not interested in that. They want to hear how they're going to pay their mortgage, how they're going to feed their children, what's going to happen with this COVID scare, what's going to happen with the vaccines, what's going to happen with all the stuff that's going on around us. And yes, I might as well throw this in. The COVID and the vaccine, the jab, whatever you want to call it, has played a role in this, in allowing the government to shrink our rights and to shrink our level of freedom. And we have to stop that. We cannot let them do that, because nothing what they're doing is constitutional. None. And if we don't fight now, look, if we don't fight for our rights, I'll just say it like this. I'm going to say 2 things about our rights. God gave us those rights as a free country. He established his country as a free nation for us to be stewards of our freedoms. We have been terrible stewards of our freedoms. We've given them away at every turn. And one man cannot save our freedom. I hate to tell people, if President Trump walked back into that White House tomorrow, we would still have the same fight on our hands that we have with Joe Biden. We cannot let our freedoms and the Constitution be sold out with the change of wind in D.C., because the wind in D.C. will always change. There will be Democrat leaders, and there will be Republican leaders, and there will be Republican presidents and Democratic presidents throughout history. That's how it's been from the day of George Washington. But the people have stayed the same. And we have got to keep fighting for our rights, because, my friend, I love you as a daughter, and I don't want your children, which at that time I will be off this landscape at some point. I'm not going to be here forever. And if the Lord tarries, your generation will have to carry this torch. I don't want you all having to pay a price for our laziness in this time of history, when we know what's wrong. We see what's wrong. And nobody wants to fight. And I'm not talking bullets and wars and violence. I'm talking about fighting on your local level for your government. Fight for your government, that it's free.
It is. And I don't want my generation to have to fight it either. And to me, I almost look at the young conservative world and I think to myself, a little less photos of yourself at galas on Instagram and a little more strategy session meetings, because that's what it is.
That's exactly right.
That's the truth of what it is. And that's what brings me to my closing thought. There were a lot of times on the GOP side that we sort of sat here and was like, what is the strategy behind this? How is this helping to move us forward? And I've seen so many times now these commentators and these grifters say, well, just only talk about the culture issues. We don't need to talk about the economy, and we don't need to talk about trade, and we don't need to talk about the global trade system because of all the restrictions. We just need to talk about the cultural stuff and the social issues. As a show host in conservative media, do people care about economics? It sounds like a silly question, but that's what I hear in the young conservative world, that no one cares about economics or education or any of those issues. Can those issues help someone get elected?
They need to be. That's the issues that should be the ones that matter to us. And unfortunately, again, in a personality-driven society and a media that has gone crazy and a media that's gotten so out of control that has become a propaganda wing of a political party, it's hard for people to do that without turning your TV off. Without turning that TV completely off, which I've had to do. I can't even watch conservative news anymore. There's just a few networks that I get online. The Epic Times is one of them. Gateway Pundit's another one. Those two, I just glance. And even them, sometimes they'll get into some the Epic Times not so much, but Gateway will have an opinion. And when I'm reading this news articles, they put opinions in it. And I as much as I respect their opinions, I just want the facts. I don't need your hyperbole. I just need you to tell me what's going on, what's happening. Let me make my call, because that's what a newspaper's supposed to do. It's not supposed to get in there. There's opinion sections. Now, if you want to write an op-ed and say, this is my opinion, that's fine, because all newspapers, I used to run one, we had an opinion section where people could give their opinion and you could disagree or agree with that. But when it came to the news is nothing but the truth and nothing but the truth, and facts, nothing but the facts. That's all that needs to be stated. And those days are done. Those days are over. And when you talk about the economy and you talk about real things that affect the country, people have gotten so caught up in this other stuff, Magdalene, I don't even think they even think twice about it. But I tell you what's happening right now. I think it's getting people's attention because we're paying $3 a gallon again at the gas station, and we're paying $80 for 2 sticks of gum, a Coke, and a pile of cheese at Walmart now, or wherever you shop, Kroger. And we're wondering, oh my God, what am I paying $80 for at the grocery store when I used to pay 30?
Yeah.
Inflation is out of control right now. It's going crazy. And there's a reason for that. It's called Washington, D.C. politics and policies. And people better wake up, because what happens with this economics, it affects us every day in our wallet.
It does. And I hope that people realize this hero worship of these political commentators and grifters, it's got to stop, because it's driving everyone to madness. This idea that if you say something against a commentator, look, people can say things against me all day if they want to. I'm not trying to become some sort of strange moral icon figure. It's got to stop. It's drowning the GOP. And what I've never understood is we're supposed to be the party of self-discipline and restraint and humility, and we're missing all of that right now. So if you want to win an election, you got to go back and figure out how to change the culture of the GOP.
And you know what's sad about that, though, what you just said, is that most people in the GOP that would hear that would toss that away and reject it outright. They would say, you're crazy, Magdalene. You don't know what you're talking about. But you just gave them the remedy for their salvation and healing. Yeah. Because if they don't stop worshiping these cult figures, and again, if it's about the people, they've got to get back to the party of being the people. They used to be that many, many years ago. They're no longer that anymore. Yeah. And you can't trust anybody in DC. You just can't.
If you want to be a fan of somebody, be a fan of a singer you like, but don't be a fan of your political commentator, because it's a recipe for disaster. And I'm telling you all that as a young person, and it's too much. Thank you so much for coming on. I usually ask people where they can follow the guest at the end of this, but you can just hit the subscribe button for the Mcfiles. Yes. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to give?
I just want to tell you I'm a fan of you, and I want to thank you for this fight. No, I mean that, kid. Listen, I love you as a daughter. I do. I mean that. You've been a breath of fresh air. The very first time I ever watched your program, you were a breath of fresh air. I'm very proud of you. I'm proud you're on our show. I am proud that you are fighting this fight for the young conservatives and for our nation, because, again, I look at you, and I've got a son that's your age. He's just a few years younger. You all are going to have to carry this torch when us old guys are gone. And I'm telling you, if the Lord tarries any length of time, if we don't fix stuff right now, if we don't get this fixed now, what y'all are facing is going to be something out of a horror novel. I'm telling you, it's going to be a zombie. It is going to literally be in a zombie apocalypse of people, because people are acting like zombies right now. Yeah. And they're just walking around in this daze on both sides. And they've got to be shaken out of this stupor, or we are going to lose our country. We will. And then I tell you what's going to happen. We're going to wind up like communist China. And we're going to wind up like Russia, the very boogeyman that the media has tried to convince us is our boogeyman. We're going to wind up like Russia and China both if this don't stop, because the people that are in power are nothing but pure plain communists. That's what their goal is communism in this country. And that's my final thought. But I want to tell you, I'm proud of you. I've been very honored to be on your show today. I really am. And I want you to keep this fight up. And I think you've got the right stuff. You've always had the right stuff to me. And the part of you that doesn't be swayed by public opinion, I think the very first show we ever did about you wanted to interview me about what it was like being a podcaster and some pointers. And I think I made that comment. You can't let public opinion sway you. You've got to be the same person, no matter whether they're hating you or loving you. And you've done that, and you're gonna be here for a while. And you're actually gonna be in the You're going to be the future host when I'm, I've got it in my will. Magdalene Rose, the new host of the Mcfiles, just in case McDonald passes its on. So get ready to shift. You'll be in this window, not this window soon. Okay.
It's a big responsibility. Well, the Rose Report is very happy.
Well, you got the Mag, you got the M already. You just have to call it the M Rose Report instead of the Mcfiles or something like that,
Well, the Rose Report is very happy to be on the Mcfiles network. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, dear.
All right.
Bless you.